A central bank digital currency could be coming sooner than you think by 2025. And have the banks just told us something without telling us something? So we'll get right into it and see what they're saying here. So, where Canada's big five banks stand on climate pledges. Now, this is really interesting, and we'll get into why in a second. So, for example, RBC is committed to providing $500 billion of sustainable financing by 2025, and it's cumulatively spent 282 billion since 2019. It's funny how they mentioned 2019, but really it was 2020, because that's when this agenda 2030 has started to be rammed down our throat, and that's where they have seized the crisis in order to ramp up this climate agenda, which is being pushed and rammed down our throats. So, it's interesting to think about how that gels with everything that's going on here, heading into potentially another crisis scenario. So TD Bank updated its sustainable finance target to 500 billion by 2030. And it's reached 108 billion in total sustainable financing in 2022. Scotiabank plans to mobilize 350 billion in climate related financing, and it's raising its initial target for 100 billion in climate related finance by 2025. And it's spent in its 2022 96 billion, it says. So BMO pledges 300 billion by 2025, and BMO said it's mobilized 90 billion since 2022 to reach a total of 267 billion in capital since 2019. CIBC says it will mobilize 300 billion to sustainable finance activities between 2018 and 2030. In its sustainability report 2022, the bank mobilized 35.9 billion in 2022, having mobilized 113 billion to date since 2018. So one has to ask about this sustainable financing activities. So what is going to fall under that umbrella? Because we have to ask that question. But the thing is, when it comes to sustainability financing or sustainable financing, whatever you want to call it, basically lending money to these startups that are going to do solar panels, maybe some wind energy, maybe carbon capture, a lot of these companies are going to go bust. That is inevitable. We know that, most small businesses go under within the first 5 years. So that these businesses are going to be no different. So they're committing all this money, but they're not really talking about the risk involved. And I find that really interesting. And that's why I'm so skeptical of this, because it makes me think, central bank digital currency, because with a central bank digital currency, suddenly it doesn't matter. They can just lend based on the climate agenda, based on how woke people are, versus whether they're actually a good candidate for that credit. I mean, to a certain extent, that already happens in the mortgage market because of mortgage insurance. You essentially have massive distortions. So the banks are lending a lot more, and they're lending a lot looser because of mortgage insurance. And that has created a massive amount of moral hazard. Well, if they do the same with a CBDC for sustainable finance, what is that going to mean for malinvestment going into these sustainable finance companies? Everybody and their uncle will be creating these solar startups and all the rest of it. And all of this money, where will it be heading into? It will be driving up inflation, because a lot of it will just be malinvestment. There'll be a lot of corruption. We know that's going to happen in Canada. So it's very interesting. And over $1 trillion committed. I mean, that's more than half of the outstanding mortgage debt for the country. So they're not talking about small amounts of money here. They're talking about massive, large amounts of money to fight climate change. Spending all this money is going to fight climate change. And this is really where the central bank digital currency comes in. And you have to remember, these bankers, they are in bed with the government, and they all know what's going on. It is no doubt that many of the CEOs at these banks already know about a central bank digital currency, already understand how it's going to be implemented, or have been assured by the central bank and the government, if they lend, they will take on those losses. through a central bank digital currency at the end of the day. So I think that's interesting. So let's take a look at what the central bank is saying here. So to everybody who thinks this is tinfoil hat stuff, you can go right to the Bank of Canada's website. And it talks about how they're openly exploring a CBDC, central bank digital currency. And I find it interesting because, you know, when they talk about some of the reasons why they're doing this, it just sounds ridiculous to you and I. And it really raises red flags in our head. And you think, well, that doesn't make any sense. So listen to this. And this is right from their website. The Bank of Canada supplies banknotes to Canadians and makes sure people are confident in the Canadian dollar. Okay. So that's what they've been doing with inflation recently, because they ultimately, them and the government, they were the ones who caused it by being so corrupt. They're not independent to the government. That is obvious to you and I. I mean, but it's just hilarious that they're saying about they want a stable financial system, and what they've done is created far from a stable financial system. Anyone can use cash, including people who don't have a bank account, a credit score, or official identification documents. However, people tend to use cash less often these days. Most payments are already digital, such as using debit or credit cards. If this trend continues, there may come a time where cash is not widely accepted in day-to-day transactions, which could exclude many Canadians from the economy. And basically what this is all about is data. At the end of the day, they want your data. So if you're using cash, they don't know what you're buying. They don't know what you're spending money on. Like if you're going into a grocery store and you're buying all this liquor, they're not going to really know that because they're not in bed with the private companies. They don't have access to that data. But if you're using a central bank digital currency, then all of a sudden you have access to that data. And that is precisely the problem, in my opinion. It's the fact that this could be used against you. And it really could be. And I'm not saying it will be used against you when they implement this. I think that's highly unlikely, actually. But all I'm saying is the risks in the future, given that there's another crisis, let's say, because these crises, they just seem to come every 5-10 years, right? That's what happens, whether it's financial, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a banking crisis, they just come, it's cycles. And what happens when they then say, okay, we're on security alert right now because let's say China goes and invades Taiwan and that just sends security absolutely crazy. And then they say, we need to track your every purchase. Well, that's easier than ever right now. I mean, recently I was flying to Panama and Delta Airlines is using Face ID to identify people. So you don't have to show your passport at Delta. They already have your passport because they scanned it when you checked in. So when you go to board the flight, it already recognizes who you are and knows who you are and boards you on the flight. You don't even have to get your passport out. It's really convenient, isn't it? But the problem is those type of systems, if you applied that to like a grocery store or you applied that to everywhere, it could be very easy to apply that. All you need is a freaking camera and everybody has their ID anyway. And if the payment system that is being used is through the Bank of Canada anyway, then the government can implement changes very, very easily. So that's the problem. There is a massive risk to freedom and liberty. And it's not necessarily because of what they're going to do right now. I'm talking about the future. It just takes one rogue politician like the one we have in charge right now, Justin Trudeau, to come in. And can you imagine how different 2020 and 2021 would have been? I mean, Justin Trudeau was acting like a dictator anyways. Imagine if he had the power of a central bank digital currency on top of that. It would have just been insane. I mean, can you imagine if you don't get the medicine, then you can't withdraw any money from your bank, or you can't buy this, or you can't buy that? You know, there's just so many bad things that can happen because of this. And anyway, rant over. God, that was a long rant. I'm so sorry. So they're talking about people, you know, a small minority of people who are using cash as a reason why they might need to implement it, which is just ridiculous. And then another ridiculous thing they say, it's also possible that in the future, cryptocurrencies or CBDCs issued by foreign countries could widely be used in Canada. This could compromise the central role of the Canadian dollar in our economy and affect the stability of our financial system. You see, I have major red flags when I read stuff like this because I know the Bank of Canada is smarter than that. I know the Bank of Canada knows that the payment processing services in Canada, it's all regulated. Like, people can't just suddenly start paying with whatever they choose and everything like that. Like, I can't, it's just kind of insane. So I think what they're saying there is kind of utterly ridiculous when you really think about it, because the government already regulates payment processors. But really what they want the Bank of Canada, which is like the Trojan horse essentially of the government. Oh, it's not the government, it's the Bank of Canada, which, by the way, we basically own and manipulate into doing whatever we want. I mean, just look at what's happened over the past 2-3 years as an example, if you don't believe me. And they're going to do this. I mean, I just think the risks, guys, are unbelievably high of this happening. And the thing is, like I said, it might not be straight away, and I doubt it will be actually. Does Canada really need a digital loonie? So this came out in May of this year when they started public consultations about basically what's going on with the CBDC. And they want to know, essentially, what do you want? What do you want from the CBDC? So we can create the carrot that we're going to dangle in front of you for you then to sign up for it. And I think the obvious thing that's going to come is your tax refunds, your benefits. They're all going to come. Anything essentially that's paid for by the government, or when you're paying the government, you're going to have that account with the Bank of Canada. You're going to have to be involved in the CBDC, which sort of gets people opting into it, because they have to. We all are having these transactions occur yearly with the government, whether you're paying tax money or you're getting a refund. There's transactions that are happening there. And let's face it, we know how indebted Canadians are. And this is what I've tried to say so many times. But when you have people who are in debt slavery, when you have people that are really just pushed to poverty, because the whole facade of the standard of living that we see in Canada is merely just, it's the debt that is out there, which will never be paid back. So when you think about how people can't afford that, 1 in 3 can't afford that $500 unexpected expense, they need that government check. They need their tax refund. They need their child benefit or whatever it is. So those people, they're going to opt into it. And you're going to see lots of people opt into it. In fact, if I was willing to guess, I would say it would be about 60-70% of people who would probably opt into it. And that would just be by the government starting it and saying they're moving the payments towards it right away before it even gets to the point that they have their refund or whatever. So I think you and I know what's likely here. So we've been researching a digital dollar for quite a while now. Well, isn't that interesting? Because, a lot of people say that, oh no, this is all tinfoil hat nonsense. There's no digital Canadian dollar. They just don't understand the risks of it. The reality is when it comes in, a lot of these people are probably going to say, see, all you tinfoil hatters, you had no idea what you were talking about. This isn't bad. There's nothing happening. But it's like I said, it's the future risk. You don't know how volatile things are going to get in the future. And to then have all that potential risk out there, all that potential power to be used by the government, it's a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. I hope you can see it too. So it's kind of crazy. And then it says right here, ultimately, the decision will be up to the government. In a statement when its public consultations began, the Bank of Canada reiterated that any decision to create a digital currency would be made by politicians, not central bankers. And yeah, we know how good those politicians are, don't we? So we can really trust in the politicians to do what's right. I mean, we're seeing all these bills right now being ran through Parliament. They're trying to get everything in place, all the building blocks in place. And it's just kind of crazy. The censorship, the different things that are happening right now is unbelievable. It's unprecedented. But a lot of people, they're too busy to look into these things. They don't have time to look into these things. But the reality is, I've done so much research into a central bank digital currency. And just given the amount of power potentially, and that's what I'm saying here, potentially that can be used by having a central bank digital currency, that risk is just not good at all, especially in a place like Canada, where you've got the politics that is so broken, so bifurcated, and also which has massively been corrupted by the immigration policies that have been ran to import voters, which I think are obvious to me and to you as well. So anyway, I hope you kind of took something away from this. I'm sorry for my long rant at the start of this, but I think it's so important that this video is pushed out there. I don't know if it will be, because quite frankly, it's hard to tell with these type of videos, and I've tried to tread carefully where I can, but you know how it goes. And especially with these bills that have been rammed through, you just never know. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, you might like this playlist here, and you might also like this video here that the YouTube algorithm recommends. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, guys.